At this point in the course, we're shifting from the monotheistic religions of the West to religions of Asia, where we're basically going chronologically, and also to understand the later religions of Asia, Buddhism specifically, you have to understand their origins in Hinduism. Hinduism is a very difficult religion to teach in a compressed class like this because, in truth, Hinduism is a very, very broad category. The word Hinduism itself is a new addition to the English language, and it designates really just such a broad umbrella of beliefs that it's sometimes difficult to find total coherence among all of them. I mean, the word Hindu itself is originally a geographical rather than a religious designation. The Indus are simply the people whom the Greeks and later the Persians called everyone who lived east of the Indus River, which roughly divides India and Pakistan today. So the people who lived over there on that side of the river were the Indus, and eventually this came to have religious designation. Um, and Hinduism is in part so hard to describe because Hinduism isn't a single religion with a coherent belief system or a single church or a single religious leader like the Pope tying it all together. And it never has been. Hinduism is a cumulative tradition built up over millennia, comprised of many different scriptures. Not all Hindus agree on which of these scriptures are purely authoritative. Um, and so this is all contributes to the richness and diversity of Hinduism as we receive it today. All Hindus will acknowledge that the four oldest Sanskrit texts we have, the four Vedas, are foundational. Um, these are texts that were written, the first of which is the Rig Veda, which was composed probably around 3,200 years ago in what is today Northwest India. These texts are written in the language of Sanskrit, or the language that the Vedic peoples spoke back then. The first quote unquote Hindus, the early Vedic peoples, were people who had actually immigrated from what is today Iran and came across Central Asia about 3,500 years ago and settled in the South Indian subcontinent. Sanskrit language is very close, actually, to ancient Iranian. Um, so these texts, the Vedas, are ritual texts that were part and parcel of the religious and social life of the ancient Vedic people. They were not written down until much later. The Vedas were memorized by priests, Brahmins. Brahmins are the social caste who are in charge of memorizing and reciting the Vedas on ritual occasions. And the content of the Vedas are really stories about the lives of the gods. So they're kind of similar to like Greek and Roman mythology in that way. And the Vedas would be recited at certain ritual occasions, right? So Brahmins had daily duties to recite portions of the Vedas as a part of their vocation in mornings and evenings, and ancient Hindus even thought that it was the recitation of the Vedas by Brahmins that was responsible for making the sun rise every morning and for making the seasons come in an orderly way and monsoons to come and give rain for the crops when they needed to and so forth, right? So Brahmins had a very important job in preserving cosmic order. Rita is the ancient Sanskrit word for it. Um, the Vedas also contain the seeds of what is going to be later Hinduism and later Hindu theology, and give a few accounts of the origins of life and the cosmos. One, the Nasadiya Sukta, the hymn to creation, I mentioned in the very first video in this lecture series, right? The idea of the universe giving shape to void and formlessness by becoming aroused in itself. Um, the account that the Rig Veda gives of the origins of plants, animals, and people is in this episode known as the sacrifice of Prajapati. who is a god who sees that the earth is barren and who offers himself up as an actual like living sacrifice to the other gods in order that his body can be dismembered and assembled into the plants, animals, and human beings that we know today. And this act of sacrifice and ritual dismemberment, reflected the actual culture of Vedic ritual. So Vedic sacrifices, that events that were sponsored by lay people who would pay Brahmins to recite the Vedas, were accompanied by fire sacrifices of some form. So, sometimes this was as simple as pouring out ritual oblations, fluid, throwing cooked food, raw vegetables into a fire, and asking the gods to come down and partake of it, so that they might grant favors in return to whoever sponsored this ritual. But it did also involve animal sacrifice in some cases, right? So this is all kind of part and parcel of the Vedic ritual worldview. In the account of the peopling and the origins of life in the world, uh, Prajapati, this god who volunteers himself to be sacrificed, is well, killed, and the parts of his body are disassembled and shaped into the flora and fauna of the world today. And importantly, the different portions of his physical body become the four castes, the four varnas, or major social groups, occupational groups. So out of the feet of Prajapati are fashioned the very first Shudras, or people who belong to the sort of manual labor caste in ancient Hindu society. Out of his thighs, the sort of blue collar workers, the Vaishyas, the artisans, merchants, people who work with their hands, and who do sort of ordinary office jobs, are constructed. And out of his upper arms, the kshatriya, who are really the aristocratic caste, the people who are the knights and the lords and the ladies. We'll see when we come to discuss Buddhism that Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha himself, is born to the kshatriyan caste. And from the mouth of Prajapati are fashioned the Brahmins. And well, the Brahmins are the ones who use their mouths as a matter of their vocation, right? They memorize and they recite the Vedas. Uh, and This whole caste scheme coming out of the body of this god Prajapati, it also reflects the kind of symbolism and semiotics of the body in Indian culture more broadly. So the understanding is that the higher up on the body you go, the more physically and ritually pure that part of the body is. So the head is the most pure part of the body, and the feet, perhaps unsurprisingly, because feet get dirty, are the least pure part of the body. You'll very often see in South Asian culture acts of ritual prostration where someone will come up to someone and either bow in front of them or physically like get on the ground, like actually put their whole sort of body on the ground in front of them. um, and this is miming out, you don't physically do it, but this is actually miming out an act of social subordination. So someone who's approaching someone to prostrate them, right, as parents would do for their children, or as a layperson would do to a monk or a nun. You're going and you're getting down and you're miming taking the dust of the feet of the person you're prostrating and putting it on your own head, right? So saying like the dirtiest part of your body is one tier above the purest part of my body, my head. So this is kind of a symbolic act of social subordination and very significant in Buddhist countries. I work in Sri Lanka, so lay people prostrating monks is a very regular part of social life there. Even the president of Sri Lanka, as a layperson, would be expected to venerate a 7-year-old monk, right? Why? Well, because monks are considered to be a social tier above lay people, right? Regardless of age or status or whatever else. So important to remember. Also, remember, if you go to South Asia, be mindful of not putting your feet up on things. Don't put your feet up on people's tables or on the back of a cab driver's seat or something like that. Um, the Vedas themselves as stories about divine romance and warfare and drama among the gods are very sort of worldly texts with worldly concerns. Vedic ritual, people who would sponsor these fire sacrifices and recitations of the Vedas were doing so for the purpose of requesting of the gods that they get something in return, that they get a healthy child born to them, or they get more cattle for their herd, right? Or that they have a successful crop, or that they become financially, they get some money. It's not until later Hinduism that we get these ideals of nonviolence and renunciation, and we'll talk more about that in future classes. But the Vedas really aren't sort of concerned with that. And the Vedas also, they don't have real sort of sophisticated ideas about long-term religious goals, about what happens to you after you die. Those elements of classical Hindu theology that we know about today really come a few centuries after the Vedas are composed. They really come about in the mid first millennium BCE, at a time when Hinduism is becoming a less nomadic and a more sedentary religion. And Hindu thinkers are reflecting on the deeper meaning of the Vedas and really kind of on deeper religious questions in general, right? It's also out of this time period that the cognate religions of Jainism and Buddhism emerge as well. Um, so the Vedas don't have an idea of reincarnation, transmigration of the soul that specifically says that when you die, your soul goes into another body. They have this very sort of general idea that when a living being dies, its life force is evaporated up to the moon, which is a kind of like storehouse of living energy, and that life energy then comes back to Earth in the form of rain. So when it rains, it falls back to the ground, and life energy is they're absorbed by plants, which are eaten by animals, and this is how the kind of the life essence is circulated in this. I mean, what we might call like a terrarium model of spiritual force or living force. It's in these later Hindu texts that we get these more coherent ideas about souls being reincarnated through human or animal bodies, and that one's future birth is determined by the kinds of moral actions they have committed in the past, right? So samsara is the cycle, the wheel of rebirth, right? This sort of unending cycle of transmigration of the soul, and karma, which is just a very simple word that means an action, is the kinds of actions that have moral consequences in the forms of what sort of birth you're going to get in the future. So if you're committing immoral actions, you're harming people, you're lying, you're stealing, this is going to mean that you're going to have a less comfortable rebirth in the future, possibly not even a rebirth as a human being, possibly a rebirth as an animal, or even a hell being. There are hell realms in Hinduism as well. The element of the self which survives throughout the cycle of samsara is the Atman, the personal soul, the essence to who we are that transmigrates from one body to another upon death. Um, we'll talk about Jain and Buddhist perspectives on the Atman or the soul. But this is another crucial theological development of this kind of axial age of Hindu theology after the Vedas. These ideas crystallize in a set of Sanskrit texts called the Upanishads. Um, Buddhists, Hindus, and Jains share a number of things in common in their beliefs. Um, Pretty much everyone in the ancient Indian world just accepted reincarnation as a fact. People didn't really question it. So Hindus, Buddhists, and Jains, they all believe in samsara, the cycle of rebirth. People in general believed that time is secular and infinite. So there isn't the idea that the universe was created once and will end at a certain time in the future. Hindus have this view that that the universe is periodically created by the god Brahma, that it lasts for a really long time, billions of years, and then it's going to retract, and then Brahma is just going to create it again anew. And there isn't an idea that there was any starting point to this. It's just has been going on this way forever and will continue this way forever. Pretty much everyone, so this includes Hindus, Jains, and Buddhists, accepted that through superordinary control over the mind and body, you can achieve things like memory of your previous lifetimes, things like supernatural powers, right? And this is, something that's still very commonly believed in South Asia today. People can get powers of mind reading, clairvoyance, and even powers of levitation and things like that. So these are all things that are germane to the Indian religious worldview. So if everyone accepted these things, what is it that different sects of Hinduism and Jains and Buddhists disagree on? Um, this is the passage that I mentioned in the very first lecture from the Rig Veda, the earliest of the Hindu texts, the Nasadiya Sukta, or the Hymn to Creation, where it says that in the beginning, all that existed was void and formless. And by the power of the heat, some sort of heat, tapas is literally the heat of the body, that one tad ekam was born. And later the text doesn't actually say what that one thing is, right? What is that? What is tadekam? What is that one thing? The fact that there is this open-endedness led to all sorts of interpretations among Hindus about the nature of God, the divine, and the basic metaphysics of the universe that we live in. So later sectarian Hindus would assign actual names and characteristics and personalities to that one God that's there at the very beginning. Vaishnava Hindus, who are the majority of Hindus today, say that that God is Vishnu. Vishnu is the creator, the architect of the entire universe. Shaivite Hindus, that represent about 30% of Hindus today, say that that god is in fact Shiva, that Shiva is the creator. He's going to be the destroyer at the end of time, and that he is the creator and master of all the other gods, including Vishnu. Uh, Brahmin Hindus, this isn't really a sect of Hinduism anymore, but there was a sect of Hinduism that attributed all of this to the god Brahma in ancient times as well. Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva are sometimes called the Hindu Trinity, and some later Hindu texts would try to reconcile these sects to assign different roles in cosmology to Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. Brahma being the creator, Shiva being the destroyer at the end of time, and Vishnu being the preserver, or the one God who would take human form or incarnation and periodically come to earth to assist humankind in times of need. Um, Shaivite Hindus, who say that Shiva is the creator of everything in the universe, say that Shiva did this in order that souls who are independent of Shiva, who existed there at the beginning of time, that souls through this painful process of rebirth could come over the course of many lifetimes to learn about their own divine nature. Right. So this is a text from a 8th century Tamil Shaiva scripture, which says that the ignorant Aravilar consider Shiva and love as two separate things. Anbu Sivam Irandu. But in reality, Anbe Sivam Abad, that Shiva himself is love, right? So it's kind of reminiscent of that passage from 1 John 4:8, which says that God is love from the Christian New Testament, right? So Shiva has created this universe for us to live in, so that he can teach us over the course of many lifetimes our own nature as blissful and omniscient beings like him. Vaishnava Hindus of Vedantic Vaishnava Hinduism treat Vishnu as the supreme creator, and the sort of mystical wing of this theological school regards the universe we live in really as the imagination of Vishnu, that he's sort of living out this dream, and we're all characters in his divine drama. This is one of the sort of hardest theological concepts that I have to translate in this class, this notion of Leela or divine play, that God has really done all of this out of playfulness. It is a concept that's very, very alien, I think, to Western monotheistic religious sensibilities. But nonetheless, we have it among Vaishnava Hindus, and I'll talk more about this when we talk about the Bhagavad Gita next class, right? But here, Vishnu in his incarnation as Krishna is a very mischievous character, right? When he's a little kid, so little baby Krishna, who is the avatar of God himself, of Vishnu, he goes around as, making mischief and stealing butter. When he's a teenager, he uses his magical flute to levitate the saris of the girls who are bathing in the river so that they don't have any clothes and they have to stay in the river, right? God, the notion of God as a prankster is, I mean, it's fun and it's interesting, but it's something that's sort of like very difficult to translate. Um, so people disagree on the name nature of God, if they even accept Creator God in ancient India. They disagree. Everyone agrees that the religious objective is escape from the wheel of rebirth, escape from samsara. But why you should escape from samsara, when and how, is a matter of enormous disagreement. Not everybody agrees on it, right? What? First of all, why? Why do you need to say we are reincarnated again and again? Um, why do we have to get out of the cycle of rebirth? Life seems all right to me. What's so bad about being alive, right? Buddhists are the ones who are going to come up with a very specific answer to this question. They're going to say that no matter how great your life is, and indeed most people and most living beings' lives aren't that great, no matter how great your life is, it's still fraught with misery and dissatisfaction. That nothing that you ever get, no amount of money, no amount of social status, no amount of physical pleasure lasts forever. And nothing is ever going to satisfy you completely. You're always going to be left wanting more, and you're always going to be left with this sort of existential distress in the fact that that nothing is ever going to make you permanently happy, right? So this is the first noble truth of Buddhism, and the reason why Buddhists say you have to get out of the cycle of rebirth. Buddhists also say that as a matter of ridding yourself from attachments, a conventional worldly life, having a family, is something that you're going to have to give up, right? So, I mean, the objective for Buddhists is actually to become a monk or a nun, a celibate renouncer. Um, and this is, speaking personally, this is kind of my issue with these absolute monastic religions like Buddhism, right? Because what if everyone really did that, right? What if everyone actually gave up their families and didn't ever get married and never had kids? I mean, what would happen? We'd live in a world where there were, well, no people, right? So that's, I mean, I'm speaking personally about my own sort of reservations about Buddhism, but that's sort of the consequence of what Buddhism means if we were all to take it completely seriously, what the Buddha actually said, right? Buddhists and Jains are also kind of comfortable with leaving the question of where people came from in the very beginning open. They're not really that concerned about it. Whereas for the Western monotheistic traditions that we discussed, the idea of God as creator of people is of fundamental importance. Let's review, where did people come from according to the Bible? Well, God fashions Adam out of dust. He does so in his own image, whatever that means, and he breathes life into him. And so we get Adam, the first man, right? And then where's the first lady come from? Well, Adam needs some companionship. So out of Adam's rib, God fashions Eve, the first woman. But what is it that is counterintuitive to your understanding of where babies actually come from that we learn about in biology and health class. What is this tableau of human creation lack, or what is paradoxical about it? Well, we have a man, God the Father, giving rise to a man, Adam, and finally, then a lady. The lady is physically coming out of a man, right? But the way that we ordinarily think about it is that uh, babies come from ladies, right? So there's a kind of reversal of biology as we experience it today, right? The official position of the church, the Roman Catholic Church, is that God is genderless, right? He transcends the human distinction between the sexes. But what in this proclamation of God's gender also might strike you as paradoxical? Well, he is neither man nor woman, he is God, right? So we still have this gendered language about God, even in this official proclamation of the church that God is genderless, right? The Pope today remains a man. I'd encourage you all to check out the movie Conclave to get some cinematic perspective on this. But the Church, Roman Catholic Church, historically consisted of men who were priests. Um, the justification for this was that the closest disciples of Jesus were all men. And so the church, following in apostolic tradition, or the tradition of the apostles of Christ, maintained this sort of gender preference for men as representatives of the church. All of the prophets of the Hebrew Bible were men as well. This is the trailer for Conclave. Um, and if you go to Exodus and you look at the commandments after the Ten Commandments that we know, there's a whole bunch more. There's a whole. These are all part of the laws of Moses, right? There's a whole ton of them. There are hundreds more, and some of them from our 21st century sensibilities can be somewhat shocking in terms of attitudes towards women, right? So, I mean, this is just one that you can pay your way out of rape, essentially. Polygyny, or a man having multiple wives at the same time, is something that is attested several times in the Old Testament, right? Something that's going to be resurrected among Mormons later on, something that's allowable in Islam. And this is a particularly unsettling legal requirement from ancient Jewish law, which demands that a bride be able to demonstrate her virginity. And failing to do so is, eligible to be put to death, right? So this is, and I mean, if you want to trawl the Christian New Testament for similarly difficult attitudes towards women that feel anachronistic to us today, you'll have no trouble doing so. Right? This from First Timothy, that this was the fall of man was Eve's fault, and women shall be saved through childbearing. Right? Um, there is in the Hindu Puranas this famous episode where this kid comes asking the sage about the nature of the world. He's wondered what the world actually is, right? What is this piece of land that I'm standing on? And he goes to the sage and he says, "Oh, sage, what is the world?" And the sage says, "Well, kid, the world is this big like dome snow globe thing, and it's resting on the back of four giant elephants. One elephant is facing in each of the four cardinal directions, and those four elephants are standing on the back of a giant turtle that's floating in space." And the kid says, "Okay, snow globe, elephants, turtle. That's interesting. Okay, got it." And he says, "But Sage, what's that turtle standing on?" And the sage says, "Well, kid, it's another turtle." And the kid says, "Okay, snow globe, elephants, turtle, turtle. Okay, but Sage, what's that second turtle? resting on. And the sage thinks for a second and he says, look, kid, it's turtles all the way down. We sometimes get the sense in the history of the monotheistic religions of the West that it's dudes all the way down. What's before that dude? Oh, it's another dude. What's before him? It's dudes all the way down. It's very dude centric. It tends to be. Um, and we have to ask also, I could just stay here all day, finding examples from all of the religious scripture that I've talked about so far in the class. And it's like shooting fish in a barrel, finding sexist examples. Are sexist tendencies in religion limited only to the Bible? We would ordinarily do this in class. The answer is, well, no way. No shortage of them that we could dredge from Hindu literature or even Buddhist literature. Also, when I teach Intro to Buddhism, I spend plenty of time talking about problems with patriarchy in Buddhist scripture as well. Why are these examples so prevalent? I mean, why do we find so much patriarchy in ancient religious scripture? This is a question that I'll leave for you to reflect on your own. It's better that it sort of comes out of a class discussion, and I won't say that there's any one single authoritative answer either, but plenty to sort of to think about. I mean, also plenty to think about in terms of the organization of political economy that predominated in the ancient world, which was really that of monarchy and strength through force, right? I mean, really, society was ruled by kings who exercised their dominion through violence and physical force. And there weren't a whole lot of alternatives too. So the fact that sort of male power would be expressed theologically coming out of society, which was completely built on male power, is in some ways perhaps unsurprising. Going back to this hymn to creation in the Rig Veda, I want to talk a little bit about one theological alternative to patriarchy that we find in Hinduism. And to be clear, I'm not making the claim that Hinduism is the feminist religion or Hinduism is some big exception. I really just want to say that because Hinduism leaves so much interpretation open for the nature of the divine, what is divinity, what is God, that certain schools of Hinduism have found female-centric alternatives to theological patriarchy. And much of this is really sort of rooted in the biological imagery of creation that we've seen in the Nasadiya Sukta before, right? This whole idea that it's really the act of sexual reproduction that gives rise to the first differentiation of matter in the universe that we know it, right? So this idea that the moment of the Big Bang, right, the moment of the origin of the universe isn't, God putting his finger out and separating the water from the dry land and saying, let there be light, but it's rather kama or sexual desire arising from the heat of the body and reproductive impulses, giving rise to differentiation of matter in an image that's much more sort of akin to the fertilization of a cell and the growth of an embryo, right? Um, and if you go to a Hindu temple, um, most Hindu temples are, Vaishnava or Shaiva, temples to Vishnu or Shiva. So the members of the Hindu Trinity, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva, they're all men. But in any Hindu temple, most of the time, the main altars hosting the god, Vishnu or Shiva, will also have an icon to the consort, the wife of that god, right? So Saraswati is the wife of Brahma, Lakshmi is the wife of Vishnu, Parvati, known by other names, is the wife of Shiva, and the pairing of the gods with their goddess partner is part and parcel of Hindu devotional imagery in almost any temple you go to. There is a school of Hindu theology which elevates the role of the goddess to being primary in the creation of the universe and the sustaining of life. So Hindus understand that there are two valences of divine energy, Shakta or male energy and Shakti or female energy. So Shaktism is the school of Hindu theology that I'm talking about now. It also comes out of Shaivism, so it's associated with Shiva-centric Hinduism and is expressed through the various incarnations of the wife of Shiva. So she has many names. Parvati is just one of her names and just one of her incarnations. But the goddess is conceived as the consort of Shiva. And one's famous quip of the school of Shaktism is that Shiva without Shakti is a Shava. That Shiva without animating female energy Shakti is a worthless corpse. If you go to any Shiva temple, you'll see this. It's the Linga Yoni. And this is a stylized representation of Shakta and Shakti. Shakta or male energy is represented by the linga, which is, well, in truth, a stylized phallus, the top portion of the linga yoni. And the yoni or female energy is represented by the base, the pedestal base, right, which is a stylized female reproductive organs and uterus, in fact, right? So this is, I would say, a very sort of graphic and direct representation of the necessary union of male and female energies, not very shy about it. Um, Shiva as a figure is kind of like the loner of the gods, and historically he was probably a later addition to the Vedic pantheon. So when the Vedic Hindus first came to India, the figure who was Shiva was gradually absorbed into the pantheon of the gods. So there's a lot of stories about Shiva being kind of an outsider socially with respect to the other gods of the Vedas. Shiva is the Adi Yogi. He's the first yoga instructor. And the mythology of Shiva and his wife begins when Sati, Shiva's wife, is the daughter of Daksha, who is the youngest son of God Brahma. And Sati falls in love with Shiva. Well, he's a sexy yoga instructor. And her dad really doesn't want Sati to marry this guy, Shiva. Shiva, he hangs out with, like, he lives out in the woods and, he hangs out with other yoga guys and he has a pet tiger and he has a snake that he wears around his neck. And he doesn't wear a shirt. And, finally, knowing that his daughter is really in love with this guy, she's not going to marry anybody else. Daksha relents and allows Sati to marry Shiva, but refuses to invite Shiva to the first big Vedic sacrifice party that he's having at his palace right after Sati and Shiva are married. And Sati is so upset about the fact that her father won't accept her new husband that she takes the very dramatic step of killing herself. She actually gets in meditative posture and overheats her body. She uses her yogic tapas, or the superheat of the body that you can generate if you're a good yogi, and she burns herself up. She self-immolates. And when Shiva discovers this, he comes and he rampages Daksha's Vedic sacrifice party and chops up Daksha's head and sort of slaughters everybody there. He realizes what he's done and he resurrects them afterwards. But he carries these sort of charred remains of Sati around, wailing, and eventually storms off to meditate in the Himalayan mountains and sits in his lotus posture and refuses to move for thousands of years. Sati in this time is reincarnated as goddess Parvati. And the story resumes when Parvati and the other gods conspire to wake Shiva out of his slumber because, well, Parvati and Shiva need to consummate their marriage in order to have a son to create a new god strong enough to defeat this demon named Taraka. So eventually they do, and they have a son, Skanda, who is able to defeat this demon. But it takes a lot of convincing to get Shiva to come out of his catatonic yogic state and to resume his marital union with goddess Parvati. Um, Shiva's consort can take many different forms. She can be the benevolent, life-giving goddess Ganga, the goddess of the Ganges River. She can be Durga, the bearer of all of the weapons of the gods. So, one of these stories is that all of the weapons that you see Vishnu and the other gods holding are actually on loan from Durga. She's the armory goddess who has these weapons and who knows best how to use them. In her most ferocious manifestation, the consort of Shiva is the goddess Kali. Kali means time. She from whom all life emerges, and she to which all life will then return. She is the scariest, most potent, and intimidating of the goddesses of the Hindu pantheon. And the story, famous story, and the skeleton key to understanding the theology of Shaktism is in the story of Kali's battle with this demon named Raktabija. Hindu mythology always centers around one nuisance demon going in front of Brahma, doing some amazing act of yoga, and impressing Brahma so much that Brahma grants him whatever wish he asks for. And so the whatever demon doing this asks for some boon of invincibility, and then the other gods then have to figure out how to defeat this now super enhanced demon. Raktabija goes before Brahma, does his handstand for 1,000 years, and comes up with a particularly devious wish to be granted by Brahma. Raktabija's boon is that he asks that from there on out, whenever he's wounded in battle, that every drop of blood that falls to the ground will generate a clone, a doppelganger of him, which will then go along to fight alongside of him, right? So when Raktabija goes out and he starts harassing the other gods, he goes into the city of the gods and he starts turning over their flip cup tables and ruining their parties, and they go to shank him, they cut him, and then 20 more Raktabijas pop out of the ground and fight alongside of him. So, pretty soon he has this army of tens of thousands of clones, and the gods think, uh-oh, like there's nothing that we can do. This is beyond our power to control this. We better call in Kali, and she'll know what to do. So Kali comes with a couple of her attendants, a couple of her lady goddess friends, and they go to battle against the army of Raktabija and his clones. And Kali, who has a very long tongue, is able to lap up the blood of the Raktabija clones as before it can fall to the ground, actually. And she and her attendants are also very careful that as the blood is squirting out of the Raktabija clones, that they go along and they catch it in cups also, so it's not going to fall on the ground, right? So finally, they've defeated this whole army of Raktabija and his clones, but at this point, Kali is out of sorts. She's in full rampage mode and she's lost track of what she's doing. And she starts heading towards the city of the gods. And the gods think, uh-oh, what are we gonna do? Kali has lost it. When she gets here, she's gonna kill all of us too. So Shiva comes in and they say, Shiva, you got to help us. What are you going to do? He does the only thing that he can do. He can't physically stop her, but Tiananmen Square style, he lays down in the path that she's walking towards the city of the gods. And when Kali steps on her, she comes to her senses and realizes what she's doing. And here, what she's actually done is she's committed this kind of taboo. She's stepped on her husband, right? So she's put the impure part of her body on her husband, which is a socially completely unacceptable thing from Hindu standards, right? So this image of Kali shocked, and she's here, when you see in the iconography, she's here sticking her tongue out also in this moment of shock when she regains her senses. And well, doesn't do any more slaughter after she's defeated Raktabija. Um, it's a very striking image, right? It's an image at the same time of female power. Obviously, she's got a garland full of skulls and a girdle full of severed arms, and she's got all of these big weapons. But it's also an image of her fidelity to her husband and the god Shiva, right? So it's at the same time an image of submission and marital propriety, right? But it is a transgressive image, right? It's an image of, the wife being the dominant partner in this relationship, right? It's an image where Shiva is lying inert and not doing anything. He is a Shava essentially. He's a corpse, right? So symbolically, there's a whole lot tied up in this. I mean, part of it is the necessity of the power of women and the role of a sexual dynamic in, well, making the world turn, right? Um, and in the epilogue to the story of Kali's defeat of Raktabija, there is this additional portion of the story where Kali is concerned about all of this Raktabija blood that she has ingested, and she thinks, "Oh, what's going to happen if I don't know, I accidentally get sick and vomit and spill this blood out? Right, this whole thing is going to happen again." She thinks, "I have to get this blood inside me to a safe place." Right. This epilogue to the story in this image is called Chinnamasta Kali, Kali who has severed her own head. Um, and what she decides to do is to, well, chop off her head and Kill Bill style, all the blood, Raktabija blood that's in her comes squirting out and is lapped up by these two attendants, one on each side of her. And then I guess, I don't know, they're going to go put it away in some lead drums somewhere deep in the Colorado mountains, the way we do with nuclear waste or something like that. So the point, though, is that Kali sacrifices herself in order to ensure the safety of all of the gods and all of the inhabitants of the world for then on out. Um, as if this story of Chinnamastakali wasn't disturbing enough, in the iconography of this story, we see that Kali, as she's doing this, is standing on top of this conjugal couple. So, what in this image is striking to you? If we were in art history class and we were talking about contrasting themes, what would you say are the very shockingly contrasting themes of this image? Kali chopping off her own head, and well, a couple embracing in ecstasy beneath her, right? I mean, it's a very stark juxtaposition of life and death, the most stark you can possibly think of, right? Um, Kali as time, right? I mean, this her name means time. And this whole theology is, well, a sort of reminder of the reality of the fact that all living beings come from women, right? That it's women who bring us into the world. We're born and we're going to die. But this all happens biologically, I mean, through the actual process of gestation and birth, which takes place through the bodies of women, right? So another exercise we would do in class would be to contrast the blood in this image with the blood that you find in Christianity. So blood central to both, but what does it represent? Sacrifice. Okay, both represent sacrifice, right? The sacrifice of Jesus Christ. Kali is willing to sacrifice herself, right? So blood is this symbol of ultimate self-sacrifice, sacrifice even in death. In Shaktism, the significance, theological significance of blood gets extended, however, in a female-centric sort of way. In the story of Shiva and Sati, the first incarnation of the goddess, Shiva's wife, when he first marries her, who commits suicide, when he is carrying around her charred remains in heaven, the different parts of her body begin to decompose and actually to fall off and fall down to the surface of the earth. And in India today, there are 51 places associated with 51 body parts of Sati, the so-called Shakti Peeths or seats of Shakti, the power of the goddess, each of which has a different temple with some connection to that part of the body. This is the Kamakya temple in Guwahati. which is in Assam in far northeast India. And Kamakya Temple is situated next to this big river that runs through Guwahati, which has water that flows through these rocks that have deposits of cinnabar, which is a kind of iron ore, and which tinges the water of the river slightly red. So the temple to Kamakya is the Shakti Peeth, which is said to be the place where the uterus of Sati fell to the ground. And for 3 days out of every month, the temple is actually closed because this is the time when the goddess is said to be menstruating. But this kind of, I think, earnest acceptance of the realities of the cycle of biological and reproductive life is something that Hindus, certainly Hindus who belong to the Shakti school of theology, are willing to confront and accept and really embrace, right? Kali was also a frightening image to the British when they occupied India. First because the idea of a all-powerful goddess was alien to their Christian sensibilities, and also because Kali became an emblem among Indian guerrilla resistance fighters. So when insurrectionists would build improvised explosive devices at the time, which were, like a box full of dynamite and nails, and they'd use it to blow up a British police station, they would call it Ma Kali Bomba or Mother Kali's bomb. And in this early 20th century poster of Kali, you see that the heads that she has strung around her neck, which traditionally are the heads of Raktabija and his demon army, have these long mutton chops and mustaches and white skin and look suspiciously like the heads of British colonial officers, right? Um, the second of the Indiana Jones movies, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, is set in the mountains of the Himalayas in Nepal, and it's a fictionalized Kali temple, so and also involving human sacrifice, right? So really, real Kali worship does not involve human sacrifice. Some Kali worship actually does involve animal sacrifice till today, but the fact that Kali is represented in this way is a kind of echo of the legacy of fear of the divine feminine in Western imagination.